Welcome to the Story Atelier, where every story is a masterpiece. Here, we bring you the most captivating tales, filled with unexpected twists, heartfelt lessons, and unforgettable moments. If you love stories that inspire, entertain, and make you think, then you've found the perfect place to be. New stories are waiting for you every day. And the best part? It's completely free. So, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on the latest videos and will help us continue to create incredible content for you. Thank you for supporting the Story Atelier, your home for the most amazing stories. Now, sit back, relax, and let today's tale take you on an unforgettable journey. The sleek black Audi purred along the winding country roads, its glossy finish catching the amber glow of the setting sun. Behind the wheel sat Cassandra, Cassie Morgan, a sharp-eyed executive whose every move exuded confidence. Her tailored suit, pristine white blouse, and silver cufflinks spoke of a life meticulously crafted, a life spent navigating corporate boardrooms with razor precision. Cassie had taken a scenic detour en route to the city for an annual charity gala her company sponsored. Her GPS suggested the route, promising breathtaking views. What it didn't promise were miles of isolation and unreliable cell reception. As the sun dipped lower, the golden light faded into an uneasy twilight. The car sputtered unexpectedly, jolting Cassie from her thoughts. A grinding noise erupted from under the hood, followed by an ominous wheeze. No, she muttered, her heart racing. She guided the car to the side of the road, its final gasp leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere. Cassie stepped out, the soft crunch of gravel under her designer heels adding to her frustration. She surveyed the countryside, endless fields, a single, lonesome dirt path, and no signs of life. The sinking realization that she was completely unprepared washed over her. Her phone? No signal. Options? Slim. After what felt like an eternity, the distant hum of an approaching vehicle pierced the stillness. Cassie turned to see a battered pickup truck trundling down the road. It pulled to a stop beside her, and a man in his early 40s climbed out. He wore worn jeans, a plaid shirt, and a grease-streaked baseball cap. His face was rugged but kind, his eyes steady and warm. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice tinged with a local accent. "Yes," Cassie replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "It just stopped." The man offered a reassuring smile. "Let's take a look. Name's Jack Wheeler. I run a garage in town." Cassie hesitated. In her world, trust was earned in contracts and courtrooms, not on the side of a desolate road. But with no alternatives, she nodded. "Cassie Morgan." Jack popped the hood with practiced ease and leaned in. As he worked, Cassie couldn't help but notice the competence in his movements. She also noticed something else, a faint sense of familiarity she couldn't quite place. "Well, Ms. Morgan," Jack said, straightening up, "it's your timing belt, not something I can fix here." Cassie's shoulders sagged. "What does that mean?" Jack chuckled softly. "Means I can tow you back to my garage. I'll fix it up for you, but it won't be ready until tomorrow." "Not exactly what you had planned." "Huh? Not even close," Cassie muttered. With no other choice, she agreed. Jack hitched her car to his truck, and the two set off towards town. Cassie sat in silence, the unfamiliar hum of the old pickup contrasting with the smooth purr of her own car. She stared out the window, the quaint town of Millhaven slowly coming into view. It was a postcard town, cozy diners, small storefronts, and an air of simplicity that felt alien to her. Jack pulled into Wheeler's Auto Repair, a small, unassuming garage at the edge of town. The fading sign overhead hinted at decades of service. As Jack unhitched her car, he gestured towards a diner across the street. "They stay open late," he said. "Why don't you grab a bite while I take a closer look at your car?" "I'll come get you when I know more." Cassie hesitated but ultimately nodded. The diner, with its cheerful neon sign and warm interior, offered a welcome reprieve. A bell jingled as she pushed the door open. Conversations buzzed softly, and the scent of coffee and fried food filled the air. Sliding into a booth, Cassie ordered coffee and a sandwich, her usual polished demeanor softening in the cozy atmosphere. As she waited, her gaze wandered. Truckers, teens, and families filled the room, their laughter and chatter blending into a symphony of ordinary life. Her eyes landed on an elderly couple in the corner, their hands intertwined as they shared a slice of pie. The sight triggered a pang of longing Cassie couldn't quite name. It had been years since she'd seen such unguarded affection. "Here you go, hon," a waitress named Darlene said, placing Cassie's order in front of her. The warmth in her voice caught Cassie off guard. "Thanks," Cassie replied, managing a small smile. As the hours passed, Cassie found herself unexpectedly drawn into conversations with Darlene and some of the regulars. Their openness felt both refreshing and foreign. She was still contemplating this unfamiliar warmth when the door jingled again. Jack walked in, scanning the room until his eyes landed on her. "Well," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Good news and bad news. Good news, I can fix your car. Bad news, I don't have the part in stock. It'll be here tomorrow afternoon." Cassie's stomach sank. "I have a meeting in the city tomorrow morning. This is a disaster." Jack scratched his head, thinking, "I'll tell you what, you can borrow my truck for the night. It's not much, but it'll get you where you need to go." "You'd lend your truck to a stranger?" Cassie asked, incredulous. "You're not exactly a stranger now, are you?" Jack said with a small smile. "Besides, I've got your car as collateral." Cassie laughed despite herself. She accepted the keys, surprised by how natural the interaction felt. As they walked back to the garage, she ventured a question, "Have you always lived here?" Jack paused, a shadow passing over his face. "No," he said quietly. "Moved here about 15 years ago for a fresh start." Something in his tone sparked Cassie's curiosity, but she chose not to press. With her meeting weighing heavily on her mind, she climbed into Jack's truck, offering a quick "thank you" before pulling away. As the truck rumbled down the highway, Cassie's thoughts drifted. There was something about Jack Wheeler she couldn't quite shake. The kindness, the quiet confidence, and the way he seemed to carry a weight no one else could see, all of it intrigued her. Little did Cassie know, this detour was only the beginning. The road ahead would uncover secrets, bridge distant pasts, and challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, her family, and the mysterious mechanic who had come to her rescue. The morning came sooner than Cassie expected. She had slept fitfully, her mind restless with a mix of curiosity and unease. Jack Wheeler was a puzzle, and Cassie hated puzzles she couldn't solve. Despite her career successes, she prided herself on being able to read people. Yet Jack was a mystery, kind and open, but with a guardedness that hinted at something deeper. After completing her meeting in the city, a flurry of stiff handshakes, profit projections, and the usual corporate rigmarole, Cassie found herself heading back to Millhaven earlier than expected. The truck Jack had lent her was a world apart from her luxury car, old but sturdy. With the faint scent of motor oil and a small collection of country music cassettes in the glove compartment, she had expected it to feel alien, yet it was oddly comforting. When she arrived at Wheeler's Auto Repair, the garage was bustling. Jack was leaning over the hood of another car, speaking to a teenage boy who was clearly taking notes. The sight gave her pause. Jack's demeanor, so easy and assured, was different from the world she knew, one that was filled with endless power plays and posturing. Jack spotted her as she parked the truck and approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Back sooner than I thought. How'd the truck treat you?" "Surprisingly well," Cassie admitted, handing him the keys. "I could get used to it." Jack grinned. "Don't let your Audi hear you say that." Cassie hesitated. There was something about his presence that made her feel simultaneously at ease and unsettled. "Thanks again for the help," she said. "I'd probably still be stranded if it weren't for you." Jack shrugged modestly. "It's what I do." As he walked her to her repaired car, Cassie couldn't help but ask, "Why did you move here? You said you came for a fresh start. What happened?" Jack stopped mid-step, the easy smile fading. For a moment, she thought he might deflect. Instead, he sighed, leaning against the car. "It's a long story," he said. "Let's just say life in the city didn't suit me. Too many ghosts." Cassie's curiosity deepened. "Ghosts?" Jack's gaze met hers, steady but somber. "Not literal ghosts," he said. "Memories, mistakes, things you can't outrun, no matter how far you go." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Cassie felt a pang of guilt for prying. Before she could respond, a cheerful voice interrupted them. "Uncle Jack, Mum says dinner's almost ready." Cassie turned to see a young girl, maybe 12 years old, bounding toward them. She had the same warm, open expression as Jack and was clearly comfortable in his presence. Jack ruffled the girl's hair affectionately. "Thanks, Emma. Tell your mum I'll be there in a minute." As Emma ran off, Jack turned back to Cassie. "That's my niece," he explained. "My sister and her kids live nearby." Cassie smiled faintly. "You seem close. They're family," Jack said simply, as if that explained everything. Before Cassie could leave, he added, "Look, I know you've had a long day, but if you're not in a rush, why don't you join us for dinner? It's just family, nothing fancy. Consider it a thank you for trusting me with your car." Cassie hesitated. The idea of spending time with strangers in a small town setting was far from her comfort zone. Yet something about Jack's invitation felt genuine. "Sure," she said before she could overthink it. "I'd like that." Jack's family home was a charming, slightly weathered two-story house that radiated warmth. Inside, the aroma of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the air. Children's laughter echoed from another room, and the kitchen was a hive of activity. Jack introduced Cassie to his sister, Rachel, a kind-faced woman in her late 30s with a no-nonsense demeanor softened by an easy smile. "Nice to meet you, Cassie," Rachel said, shaking her hand. "Jack's told us a little about you." "All good things, I hope," Cassie replied, feeling slightly out of place. Rachel chuckled. "Mostly about your car trouble. He said you handled it better than most would've." The dinner table was long and mismatched, surrounded by a jumble of chairs. The food was simple but hearty: roasted vegetables, warm rolls, and steaming dishes passed from hand to hand. Cassie found herself sitting between Jack and Emma, the girl who had called him earlier. As the meal progressed, Cassie was drawn into the rhythm of their conversations. It was loud, chaotic, and full of laughter, so unlike the formal, stilted dinners she was accustomed to. She learned that Rachel had 3 children, Emma being the eldest. She also noticed how Jack's demeanor changed around his family, his usual guardedness replaced by a relaxed warmth. Halfway through the meal, Emma turned to Cassie. "Uncle Jack used to be an artist. You know, Emma," Jack said, his tone playful but firm. Cassie's eyebrows lifted. "An artist?" Emma grinned mischievously. "Yeah, he even had a gallery in the city, but he never talks about it." Cassie turned to Jack, intrigued. "Is that true?" Jack sighed, clearly resigned. "It was a long time ago. Another life." The conversation moved on, but Cassie's curiosity only grew. What kind of life had Jack lived before Millhaven? What had driven him to leave it all behind? After dinner, as the children ran off to play and Rachel cleaned up, Jack offered to show Cassie the studio. It was a small space at the back of the house, filled with canvases in various stages of completion. The paintings were breathtaking: vibrant landscapes, intimate portraits, and abstract works that seemed to pulse with emotion. "These are incredible," Cassie said, moving from one painting to the next. "Why don't you do this anymore?" Jack leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "Life gets in the way," he said simply. "Priorities change." Cassie stopped in front of a half-finished portrait of a young girl sitting on a porch swing. Something about it caught her attention. "This one," she said. "Who is she?" Jack hesitated, his expression unreadable. "Just someone I used to know." The answer felt incomplete, but Cassie decided not to press. Instead, she asked, "Do you ever think about going back to it? Painting full-time?" Jack smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but there's a lot tied up in it. Memories, people, places I'd rather not revisit." Cassie nodded, sensing the weight of his words. As they left the studio, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jack's past held more secrets than he was willing to share. Later that night, back at her hotel, Cassie found herself staring at the business card Jack had given her the day before. She traced the embossed lettering absently, her mind turning over everything she'd learned, or hadn't learned, about the man who had helped her. The artist, the mechanic, the uncle, the man with a past he seemed determined to keep buried. Jack Wheeler was more than he appeared to be, and for reasons she couldn't quite explain, Cassie was determined to uncover the truth. Little did she know, the truth was far closer, and far more personal, than she could have ever imagined. The next morning, Cassie sat in the modest cafe across from Wheeler's Auto Repair, her untouched coffee growing cold as she sifted through the events of the past few days. Jack Wheeler was a paradox, and her growing curiosity about him was becoming impossible to ignore. The man was kind yet reserved, a former artist turned mechanic with a family he clearly adored, but there was something beneath the surface, a guardedness that hinted at secrets too painful to confront. She glanced across the street. Jack was at the garage, working on a minivan with the same quiet focus she'd noticed the day before. The scene felt like a world away from her own life of corporate chaos. It wasn't just curiosity pulling her back to Millhaven, it was the strange sense of belonging she felt here. Something she hadn't experienced in years. Cassie's thoughts were interrupted by the cafe's door jingling open. A familiar voice greeted her. "Morning, Ms. Morgan, back so soon?" Jack stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. Cassie forced a smile. "Call me Cassie, and yes, I thought I'd stay a little longer. The city can wait." Jack raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Instead, he nodded toward her cup. "Mind if I join you?" "Please," Cassie said, motioning to the seat across from her. As Jack settled in, Cassie couldn't resist probing further. "So, Emma mentioned last night that you used to have a gallery. What happened?" Jack hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. For a moment, Cassie thought he might deflect. But then he sighed. "Life happened. The gallery wasn't paying the bills. And I had family to think about. My sister needed help, so I came back here." "Do you miss it?" Cassie asked gently. Jack looked up, his eyes shadowed with a mixture of longing and regret. "Every day, but sometimes, you have to let go of what you love to do what's right." Before Cassie could respond, the cafe's atmosphere shifted, the door jingled again, and a tall man in a tailored suit strode in. his presence commanding attention. Cassie's stomach dropped when she recognized him. "Dad?" Richard Morgan's sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on her. He approached their table with the confidence of a man used to being obeyed. "Cassandra," he said, his voice clipped, "I've been trying to reach you. What are you doing here?" Cassie's mouth went dry. She's been waiting on her car," Jack interjected, his tone polite but firm as he stood. "I'm Jack Wheeler. I've been helping her out." Richard's gaze flicked to Jack, appraising him in a way that made Cassie bristle. "I see. Well, thank you for your assistance, Mr. Wheeler, but I need to speak with my daughter. Privately." Jack glanced at Cassie, and she gave him a subtle nod. "I'll let you two talk," Jack said, excusing himself. As soon as Jack was gone, Richard sat, his expression stern. "Cassandra, what is going on? You've been ignoring calls, missing meetings. This is unacceptable." Cassie's anger flared. "I'm taking some time for myself. Is that such a crime? When you're the face of Morgan Enterprises?" "Yes, it is," Richard snapped. "You have responsibilities, Cassandra. The board is already asking questions." Cassie stared at him, her frustration boiling over. "Maybe I don't want to be the face of the company anymore." "Did you ever think of that?" Richard's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice. This is your legacy. It's what you've worked for." "No," Cassie said quietly. "It's what you worked for. And maybe I'm tired of living in your shadow." The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the sound of the cafe's bustle. Finally, Richard leaned back, his tone softening. "Cassandra, I'm only trying to protect you. The world isn't kind to women in power. You need to be twice as strong, twice as smart, and twice as ruthless." "Maybe I don't want to be ruthless," Cassie replied, her voice trembling. "Maybe I want something more." Richard's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, the door jingled again. This time, it was Emma, her face pale and frightened. "Cassie," she said, ignoring Richard entirely, "you need to come. It's Jack." Cassie shot to her feet, her heart racing. What happened? They found Jack in the garage, standing over a half-dismantled engine, his face pale and his hands trembling. His sister Rachel was beside him, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. "What's going on?" Cassie asked, rushing to his side. Jack shook his head, refusing to meet her gaze. "It's nothing. I need some air." Before anyone could stop him, Jack strode out the back door, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Cassie turned to Rachel. "What's wrong with him?" Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's his past catching up with him. Something about you, it stirred up memories he's tried to bury." Cassie felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of memories?" Rachel hesitated, then gestured for Cassie to follow her into the small office. She closed the door behind him and spoke in a low voice. "You remind Jack of someone he lost a long time ago." "Who?" Cassie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel's expression softened. "When Jack was younger, there was an accident. A boy died, and it tore our family apart. Jack blamed himself, even though it wasn't his fault." Cassie felt her stomach drop. "What kind of accident?" Rachel shook her head. "That's not my story to tell. But whatever happened, it changed him. He left everything behind, his art, his gallery, even the woman he loved, and came back here to start over." Cassie's mind raced, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Jack's guardedness, his reluctance to talk about his past, it all made sense now. But there was still so much she didn't know. "I need to talk to him," she said, her resolve firm. Rachel nodded. "He's probably at the lake. That's where he goes when he needs to think." Cassie found Jack sitting on the edge of the lake, his elbows on his knees and his gaze fixed on the water. The air was still, the surface of the lake reflecting the fading light of the setting sun. "Mind if I join you?" she asked softly. Jack didn't look at her but nodded. She sat beside him, waiting for him to speak. After a long silence, he finally said, "I'm sorry you had to see that. You don't have to apologize." Cassie replied, "But I need to understand. Rachel told me about the accident." Jack flinched, his jaw tightening. "She shouldn't have. She didn't tell me everything." Cassie said gently, "But I want to know. I want to understand you." Jack's shoulders sagged, and he exhaled shakily. "It was my brother," he said finally. "Thomas. He was riding his bike near the lake. And there was a car." His voice broke, and Cassie reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "It's okay," she said. "Take your time." Jack swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The driver couldn't stop in time. It wasn't their fault, but my family blamed him anyway. It tore us apart." Cassie's chest tightened. "Do you know who the driver was?" Jack hesitated, then shook his head. "No, my parents kept it from me. Said it was better that way." Cassie's heart pounded in her chest. Something about Jack's story felt disturbingly familiar. Memories she'd buried long ago began to surface, fragments of a sunny day by a lake. The sound of screeching tires. And her father's voice shouting her name. "Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling. I think I know who the driver was." Jack turned to her, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you saying?" Cassie's breath hitched as the truth hit her like a freight train. It was my father. Cassie's revelation hung in the air, suffocating in its weight. Jack stared at her, his expression a mix of disbelief, anger, and raw pain. For a moment, she thought he might storm off. But instead, he rose abruptly and began pacing along the lake's edge. "Your father?" he repeated, his voice trembling with restrained emotion. "Are you sure?" Cassie nodded, her throat tight. "I didn't remember at first. But as you were talking, it all came flooding back. The lake, the accident, the sound of the tires, my father shouting my name. I was there, Jack. I was in the car." Jack stopped pacing, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I didn't know." Cassie's voice cracked, her own guilt bubbling to the surface. "I was a child. My father never talked about it. And I buried it. I guess. Until now." Jack turned to face her, his eyes blazing. "Do you have any idea what that day did to my family?" "To me? My brother died, Cassie, and now you're telling me you were in the car?" Cassie stood, tears streaming down her face. "Do you think I don't feel responsible? That I don't hate myself for what happened? Even if I was just a kid?" Jack's anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "You were a kid, but your father, he was the driver. He was the adult. He was supposed to." He broke off, his voice choked with emotion. Cassie stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Jack, I need to know what you're feeling. If you want me to leave, I will, but please don't shut me out." Jack stared at her, his expression softening just enough for her to see the storm brewing beneath. "I don't know what I'm feeling," he admitted finally. "Anger, confusion, grief, it's all tangled up. But I know one thing. I can't deal with this right now." Cassie swallowed the lump in her throat. "I understand," she said quietly. "But Jack, this isn't just about the past anymore. We can't ignore it." Without another word, Jack turned and walked away, leaving Cassie alone by the lake, her heart heavy with uncertainty. Cassie returned to her hotel that night, unable to sleep. Her thoughts raced, fragments of memories colliding with the events of the past few days. She replayed her father's stern expression, Jack's pain-filled eyes, and her own growing sense of dread. The next morning, she decided she needed answers. If she was going to confront the past, she couldn't do it alone. She needed to hear the truth from the one person who had buried it for years, her father. Richard Morgan was staying at a nearby inn, a modest establishment that seemed out of place for a man of his stature. When Cassie arrived, she found him in the lounge, sipping coffee and reading a newspaper. He looked up as she approached, his expression guarded. "Cassandra," he said evenly, "what brings you here?" Cassie sat across from him, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me." Richard folded his newspaper, his gaze narrowing. "What is this about?" She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "The accident at the lake. The boy who died. Were you the driver?" Richard's face blanched, his usual composure slipping. "Cassandra, where is this coming from? Just answer me," she demanded, her voice rising. "Were you the one driving that day?" For a moment, he said nothing, his hands tightening around his coffee cup. Finally, he nodded, his voice barely audible. "Yes." Cassie's chest constricted, her worst fears confirmed. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you tell anyone?" Richard's gaze was steely. "Because it was an accident. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't reckless. It was a terrible, tragic accident. And I knew if I came forward, it would ruin everything, my career, our family's reputation. So I kept quiet." Cassie stared at him, her anger and disbelief mounting. "You let a family grieve, thinking their son died because of some faceless driver. You let Jack." Richard interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "How do you know that name?" Cassie hesitated, then said, "He's the mechanic who helped me with my car. He's Thomas's brother." Richard's face darkened. "You've been talking to him?" "Cassandra, you have no idea what you're getting involved in." "I know exactly what I'm getting involved in." Cassie shot back. "I'm trying to make things right. Something you should have done a long time ago." Richard leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can fix this? You think dredging up the past will help anyone? Leave it alone, Cassandra. Some things are better left buried." "No," Cassie said, her voice firm. "Not this." Cassie left the inn, her emotions a chaotic mix of anger, disappointment, and determination. Her father's refusal to take responsibility only strengthened her resolve. She couldn't change the past, but she could confront it, and she needed Jack to do the same. She found him at the garage, working quietly on an old sedan. He glanced up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "I talked to my father," she said, her voice steady. Jack straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "And?" "He admitted it," Cassie said. "He was driving. He said it was an accident. But he kept it hidden to protect himself." Jack's jaw tightened, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Of course he did." Cassie stepped closer, her eyes pleading. "Jack, I can't change what happened. But I need you to know I'm not like him. I want to make this right. Whatever it takes." Jack stared at her for a long moment, his expression softening ever so slightly. "And what does making it right look like? Cassie, bringing him here, forcing him to apologize? It won't bring Thomas back." "No," Cassie admitted, "but maybe it can give you and your family some closure. Maybe it can help us move forward." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Closure," he muttered. "I don't even know what that means anymore." "It means facing the truth," Cassie said gently. Together, Jack met her gaze, the weight of their shared past reflected in his eyes. "All right," he said finally, "but this isn't just about you and me. My family deserves to hear it too." Cassie nodded, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. "I'll talk to them. I'll do whatever it takes." As Jack returned to his work, Cassie felt a spark of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to see it through. Little did she know, the journey was far from over. The truth was only the beginning, and the choices they would face would test their strength, their forgiveness, and the fragile bond they were beginning to build. The evening air was thick with tension as Cassie and Jack stood outside Rachel's house. Inside, the Wheeler family was gathered, unaware of the bombshell that was about to be dropped. Cassie clutched her phone tightly, the weight of what she was about to say pressing heavily on her chest. "You don't have to do this," Jack said, his voice low but steady. "Yes, I do," Cassie replied, meeting his gaze. "Your family deserves to know the truth." Jack nodded, though the apprehension in his eyes mirrored her own. Together, they stepped inside. The scene was warm and chaotic, Rachel setting the table, Emma helping her younger siblings with homework, and Jack's youngest nephew chasing the family dog around the living room. The sight made Cassie's chest ache with both longing and dread. This family had endured so much, and she was about to upend their world again. Rachel looked up, her smile faltering as she took in their serious expressions. "What's going on?" Jack stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk. It's about Thomas." The room fell silent, Rachel's hands stilled, and even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. She guided them into the kitchen, leaving the adults alone in the living room. "Jack, what is this about?" Rachel asked, her tone wary. Jack glanced at Cassie, who took a deep breath before speaking. "Rachel, there's something you need to know. Something about the accident." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "What kind of something?" Cassie's voice trembled as she said, "My father was the driver that day. He's the one who hit Thomas." Rachel stared at her, the color draining from her face. "Your father?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Cassie nodded, her heart pounding. "He kept it a secret. He thought he was protecting our family. But I know that doesn't make it right. I'm so sorry." Rachel turned to Jack, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Did you know about this?" Jack shook his head. "I just found out. Cassie told me yesterday." Rachel's hands clenched into fists. "So, what now? Your father gets to say, sorry, and we're supposed to forgive him?" "No," Cassie said quickly. "I'm not asking for that. I thought you deserved the truth. And if there's anything I can do to make this right, I will." Rachel's voice rose, sharp and filled with pain. "You can't make this right. Nothing can. Thomas is gone, and nothing you or your father does will change that." "Rach," Jack said softly, stepping toward her, "I know this is hard." "Hard?" Rachel snapped, her eyes blazing. "It's more than hard, Jack. It's impossible. Do you have any idea what it was like for Mum and Dad? For me, we lost everything, and now we find out the man responsible has been living his life like nothing happened?" Cassie stood frozen, guilt and helplessness washing over her. Jack placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder, his voice steady. "I know you're angry. I am too, but holding on to that anger, it won't bring him back." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, her defenses crumbling. "I don't know if I can do this. Jack." Jack pulled her into a hug, his own eyes glistening. "We'll figure it out together." Cassie watched the siblings, her heart aching. She wanted to say something, anything, to ease their pain, but no words felt adequate. Instead, she stood silently, waiting for the storm to pass. The next morning, Cassie drove to the inn where her father was staying. She had called ahead, insisting he meet her in the lobby. When she arrived, she found him sitting stiffly in an armchair, his face a mask of impatience. "Cassandra," he said curtly, "I hope this is important." "It is," she replied, her voice firm. "We're going to see the Wheelers." Richard's eyes narrowed. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't care what you think. Cassie shot back. They deserve to hear from you. You owe them that much. Richard hesitated, his usual air of authority faltering. And what do you expect me to say? That I'm sorry? That I regret what happened? Yes, Cassie said, her tone unyielding, because it's the truth. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Then, with a heavy sigh, he rose from his chair. Fine, let's get this over with. The tension in the Wheeler household was palpable as Cassie and Richard arrived. Jack stood by the door, his expression unreadable. Rachel was seated on the couch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The children had been sent to a neighbor's house, leaving the adults alone to face the past. Richard stepped inside, his posture rigid. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on Rachel before settling on Jack. I don't know how to begin, he said finally, his voice uncharacteristically soft. How about with the truth? Rachel snapped. Richard nodded, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his guilt. The truth is, I was driving that day. I didn't see Thomas until it was too late. It was an accident, but I know that doesn't excuse what I did afterward. I should have come forward. I should have faced the consequences. And why didn't you? Rachel demanded, her voice trembling with anger. Richard met her gaze, his own filled with shame. Because I was a coward. I was afraid of what it would do to my career, to my family, and I told myself it was better this way. That knowing wouldn't change anything. Rachel's expression hardened, tears streaming down her face. You're right, it doesn't change anything. Jack stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Rach, let him finish. Richard turned to Jack, his voice thick with emotion. I can't undo what I did. I can't bring Thomas back. But I'm here now, and I want to do whatever I can to make amends. Jack studied him for a long moment, his jaw tight. You can start by listening, by understanding what your choices did to us. For the next hour, the Wheelers shared their pain, their anger, and their grief. Richard listened silently, his usual bravado stripped away. When they were done, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't expect your forgiveness, he said. I just wanted you to know how sorry I am. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Finally, Jack spoke. Forgiveness isn't something you get overnight. It's something you earn, and that starts now. Richard nodded, his eyes filled with unshed tears. Thank you. That evening, as the sun set over Millhaven, Cassie and Jack sat together by the lake. The air was cool, the water still and reflective. Do you think we did the right thing? Cassie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded slowly. I think so. It's not going to be easy, but it's a start. Cassie looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and something deeper. Thank you, Jack, for everything. Jack smiled faintly, his hand brushing against hers. Thank you for not giving up. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Cassie felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it, together. Life lessons from Cassie and Jack's journey. Life is a tapestry woven with choices, relationships, and circumstances, some of which are in our control, and others that are not. The story of Cassie and Jack reminds us of the power of forgiveness, the courage it takes to confront the past, and the importance of finding meaning in connection and compassion. Let's take a moment to reflect on some of the lessons their journey can teach us. 1. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. Forgiveness is not about condoning someone's actions or forgetting the pain they caused. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. Jack and Rachel faced a choice: hold on to the pain of the past or open the door to healing. By choosing to forgive, they reclaimed their peace and paved the way for reconciliation. Remember, forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it does give us a chance to move forward. 2. The truth is the foundation of healing. The truth can be painful, but hiding it only deepens the wounds. Cassie's decision to uncover and share the truth about her father's role in the accident was the first step toward mending broken hearts. It takes courage to confront the past, but honesty is the cornerstone of trust and healing. Even when it's hard, facing the truth brings clarity and strength. 3. Family is about more than blood. The Wheelers exemplify the true meaning of family: unconditional love, support, and resilience. While families can face unimaginable loss, they can also be a source of strength and comfort. Cassie's growing connection to Jack and his family reminds us that love and belonging can be found in unexpected places, and sometimes we create our own family through the bonds we nurture. 4. It's never too late to start over. Jack's journey from artist to mechanic and back again shows that life is full of second chances. You're never too old or too set in your ways to pursue your passion. Rebuild relationships, or find a new path. Whether it's a career, a relationship, or a personal dream, every day is an opportunity to begin again. 5. Empathy is the bridge to understanding. Throughout the story, empathy played a central role in bridging the gaps between characters. Cassie's willingness to understand Jack's pain, Jack's efforts to listen to his family, and even Richard's eventual acceptance of accountability all stemmed from the ability to see the world through someone else's eyes. Empathy isn't just about feeling sorry for someone, it's about being present and open to their experiences. 6. Love requires vulnerability and effort. The connection between Cassie and Jack didn't come easily. It required them to lower their defenses, confront their fears, and navigate difficult truths. Love, whether romantic, familial, or platonic, thrives when we are willing to be vulnerable, to trust, and to grow together, even in the face of adversity. Closing thought. Life doesn't come with a perfect map, and our paths are often shaped by unexpected twists and turns. The key is how we choose to respond. Whether it's owning up to mistakes, offering forgiveness, or daring to hope again, we all have the ability to rewrite our stories. Cassie and Jack's journey reminds us that the road to healing and happiness is rarely straight, but it's worth every step. So, as you reflect on their story, ask yourself, what's one step you can take today toward forgiveness, truth, or love? You might be surprised by where it leads you.